Hi. So this is one of my favorite activities to do with my students. It is to read them excerpts from a book called God's Hotel. It's actually written by a physician, not a nurse, but this is always the book I come back to when I forget what the point is. And so I love reading this to my early students who are just getting into the nursing profession because it reminds them what we're here for. So I'm going to read some of them to you, some of my favorites. There's tons more, but these are some of the ones that I use with my students and then what we kind of talk about. So the first one says, "It was late afternoon and I was up in the x-ray department when Dr. Romero came in to look at the x-ray of her newly admitted patient. She hadn't examined him yet and had rushed to get an x-ray taken before the department closed at 4. She asked if I wanted to look at it with her. Sure. She snapped this film up on the light box and we both stepped back and scanned it. It was an x-ray of a chest, lungs, heart, ribs. The lungs looked normal and the heart looked normal, but coming out of the ribs on the left was some huge thing that seemed to be a mass of bones, fragment, and tissue. Wow, that's not good, I said. What is it? I don't know yet. I haven't seen the patient yet. Well, what does it say in the records? It doesn't say anything about a mass, and all I know is that he's been at the county hospital for 2 months because he was weak and losing weight. They never figured out what was wrong with him, but since he was homeless, they sent him here. So we went downstairs to find the patient and take a look. We found Mr. Jackson in bed, pale, thin, and surprisingly scruffy, given how long he'd been at the county hospital. Dr. Romero introduced herself and me and then pulled back the sheets. Mr. Jackson's chest was thin, unwashed, and bony, and neither of us could see a mass. But then Dr. Romero rolled him onto his right side, and there it was, a stony lump as big as a clenched fist, growing right out of his back. It was obvious. Mr. Jackson had cancer, probably lung or kidney cancer, and that was the reason for his unexplained weight loss and weakness. Dr. Romero sighed. The nurses must hate the interns at county, she said, and what she meant was that even if the interns and residents and attending physicians had never rolled Mr. Jackson onto his right side as we just had, the nurses must have done so many times. They must have seen that lump. Did they never tell the interns about it because they were angry, sullen, and felt abused? Or did they tell the interns many times, and many interns, but in the new system that protected the interns from sleep deprivation by assigning them shifts instead of patients, did each intern just pass along the news of the lump to the next? What I took away from Mr. Jackson was this. The diagnosis is written on the body. Look for it. Turn the patient on his side. Examine him thoroughly. Don't miss the obvious. All of those shadings of color, those patterns, those subtle sounds, the presence of abnormality, the absence of normality, and sometimes even the presence of normality could, I learned in those first few years, saved a life. And I use this one to talk about the nursing process and about assessment with my students. And one of the things that I wrote as a note that I talk to my students about is the most important tools in nursing are the ones we are born with, our senses. The best nurses aren't the ones with the skills. They are the ones that recognize the necessity in using what we already have. So that's one of my favorite ones to read about health assessment, and the students love it, right? Because I could just give them a speech about how important assessment is, or I could tell them stories like this. So this is another one that talks to them about doing the little things. So when we're talking about patient-centered, person-centered care, so one of the AACN domains, part of the essentials, this is one that I talk about with them too. Mrs. Todd was 35 years old. She had cancer. Her cancer was brain cancer, and what made it horrible was that it was just behind her right eye, and it had grown, in spite of surgery and radiation, right out of her eye. The surgeon had removed the eye and sewn the eyelid down over the cancer, but the cancer was still growing. Mrs. Todd had never been beautiful, but with that, the radiation had caused her hair to fall out, the steroids, which had caused her face to balloon, and the sewn eyelid, which had started to bulge. She was now very hard to look at, yet she was pleasant and quiet. She always smiled as I passed by. Eventually, we were on speaking terms. One day, I finally braved my reluctance and stopped by her bed. Full stop. We looked at each other, she at me, white-coated, rushed, a bit disheveled. I looked only at her left eye. Is there anything I can do for you? I asked her after a bit. She said, yes, she replied, there is. I really don't like the food they're giving me. It's all cut up and bland. Do you think it could be changed? And another thing, could you arrange for me to visit the eye doctor? I need a new pair of glasses. I was and am to this day floored by her response. I was and am awestruck by such equanimity. She wanted not euthanasia or a miraculous cure, stronger pain medications, or a second opinion, but different food. A pair of glasses. She said nothing about her terrible misfortune. She was calm, matter of fact. Somehow she had accepted her fate, and it was the small things, the little daily things that were important to her. Even when there is nothing to do for a patient, no cancer to discover, no paradoxical pulse to take, there is still something to do. It doesn't have to be life-saving, grandiose, and heroic. It can be as simple as a pair of glasses or a different diet. She taught me that I didn't have to be afraid of the possibly contagious bad luck of my patients that they would manage by themselves. What I had to do was ask them what I could do for them and then do it if I could. For those who couldn't answer for themselves, there were other ways of learning what they needed. She also convinced me of the corollary. It's not the big thing. And what I talk to my students about for this is, again, just person-centered care, right? She just wanted simple things. And I wrote, doing the little things means you have to take the time to notice them in the first place. So that's another thing about our students, right? You want to do the heroic things, right? You have to stop and spend time enough with a patient to notice that those things are happening. Let's see. When did we get so caught up in ourselves and our nursing shifts that we missed what others were experiencing around us? We are supposed to be the hands and feet, but what about also making sure that we are being the eyes and ears? So again, we just talk about listening. We talk about the art of silence and things like that. And then this last one, I'm almost done, is the one that I use to talk about with my students, again, about doing the little things, but about caring. And just how we can do that. Okay, so like the admitting ward, it had its own physicians to admit, examine, and discharge its patients, and this month, Dr. Curtis was one of them. He just returned from outside the hospital, he told me, and was headed back to a patient who, having been rehabilitated after a stroke, had been ready for discharge for months. But every day when Dr. Curtis made his rounds, checking on the 36 patients on the ward, this patient was still there, still zipping around in his wheelchair, still going to therapy. Finally, Dr. Curtis said, I asked him why, since he was able to walk, was he still there? Why was he still in a wheelchair? Why hadn't he been discharged? No shoes, doc. They ordered me special shoes, but they're still waiting for Medicaid to approve them. How long have they been waiting? Dr. Curtis asked. 3 months. Dr. Curtis thought a bit. What size shoe do you wear? Size 9. Dr. Curtis reflected for a while. He thought about his duties, his other patients, the charts he had to dictate, the quality assurance forms he had to fill out, and then he left the hospital, got in his car, and drove to Walmart, where he bought a size 9 running shoes for $16.99. He'd just come back with the shoes and was going over to the ward to put them on the patient and write the discharge orders. Was he planning to submit his receipt for reimbursement? I asked. He laughed. As I watched him hurry back to the rehab ward, I wondered, why had Dr. Curtis done this, and why hadn't anyone else? It was a simple thing to do, but it never would have occurred to me to do it. I would have been frustrated with the shoe delay, of course, and I would have filled out a second or even a third Medicaid request. I might have even written Medicaid or braved its phone tree to complain about the time the pair of shoes was taking. But it would have never occurred to me to go to Walmart and buy the patient's shoes. I had too much to do, too many forms to fill out, too many other patients to see. He then reminded me of a saying I loved but had never understood. The secret in the care of the patient is in caring for the patient. I'd always assumed that it meant caring about the patient, loving or at least liking the patient. But when I saw Dr. Curtis's rushing off to put shoes on a patient he barely knew, I thought there must be more to it. So I tracked down the quote. It turned out that Dr. Francis Peabody read that to the graduating medical class of Harvard, and he didn't mean caring about a patient, but caring for a patient, which he explained meant doing the little things, the little personal things that nurses usually do. And the irony is that, right, he's a physician and was talking about that. I talked to my students about the fact that during a nursing shift, you are not allowed to leave the hospital and go to Walmart to get your patient shoes for the most part. But we talk about doing the little things. I tell them stories about, if I had a patient that got extubated in the middle of the night and maybe progressed and was able to eat and pass a swallow study, but they passed the swallow study at 8:30 p.m. at night and the kitchen is closed and there's nothing to eat. What do we say? Like, sorry, I don't know what to do for you. Or we go somewhere to another unit and say, can you find what I need? So we don't leave the hospital and go buy shoes, but there are little things that we can do that make a difference. The little daily things. So those are just some of the excerpts from the book. If you've never read it before, highly recommend. Like I said, it's a really great book. My students love it. And again, it's not just me preaching at them. It's just reading real life stories from this physician. I also feel like it really helps with our IPE perspective that we talk about as well. You think this person is wonderful. All these stories that they've, read and learned and all these things, they're a doctor. So, right, typically our nursing students from social media and things like that have a perception that, physicians are rushed, they're hurried, they're not taking time to notice things. And this book kind of fights back against that. So it serves a lot of purposes for me. So hope you like it.